Assalamu alaikum. Good evening and welcome everyone. I would like to thank you all on behalf of the club for attending today's webinar. And also I want to thank Dr. Muhammed Akiyama to present presenting today's webinar. I am Faisal Hajri, the president of the club, and I would be your host for today's webinar. Before we dive into the main topic, I would like to introduce the club really quick, mission and vision. Our mission to raise awareness, bring about the necessary change in attitude, and to provide students with opportunities to take action in protecting, restoring, and improving the environmental quality in Saudi Arabia. King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals in particular. And regard to our vision to play and fulfill a main role in the 2030 vision by providing a healthy, a clean and protecting environment supporting a sustainable world for all organisms, now and for future generation based on a society living in harmony with nature. This is our Leaders Club. And for today's webinar is titled Introduction to the Economics of Energy and the Environment, presented by Dr. Muhammed Akimaya, Assistant Professor of Economics at KFUPM Business School. And I would thank you again, Dr. Muhammad. Please, the mic is yours now. And I will stop my share screen and you can share your screen.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. So thank you, Faisal, for and the KFUPM Environmental Club for providing this session. So think about it more towards a knowledge sharing session, because if we're thinking about KFUPM, it's a much more of an engineering university or an engineering school. But we actually do have a business school, and we have a department that handles, not only finance and accounting, but also the economics. So hopefully this will be a, fruitful knowledge sharing session that, when it comes to energy and environment, there are, a lot of different approach, a lot of different angles, a lot of different perspective. And in this, session, it will be specifically looking at economics. Okay, so I have a presentation ready, so hopefully I can share it. Okay, all right, good. So it looks like I can actually share it. 1 second. Okay, so, all right, so the title of this knowledge sharing session, I would say, is the introduction to the economics of energy and environment. Okay, so when it comes to the energy and environment, a lot of people, I'm pretty sure all of you have already know about the issue. There's global warming, there's climate change, there's carbon pollution, all of you are perfectly aware of this. But as I mentioned previously, there's different ways of looking at these specific problems. And why economics, right? So, when it comes to economics, it's a specific branch of study, I would say, that looks at decision making. A lot of you, when I say economics, a lot of you would say that, when it comes to economics, that's supply and demand, or that's GDP, that's inflation rate, all of this, what do you call that, jargons that, it's related to the economy of a country, but you can't really use economics here. But it turns out that economics is much more useful than that. So before we start looking at the problem itself, the problem between energy and environment, we know that, when it comes to fossil fuel industry, there's a lot of environmental pollution, environmental hazard. Before we even touch that, I want everyone to be on the same page. I want everyone to understand the perspective of economics. When it comes to economics, it's a study of optimal allocation of scarce resource. Basically, you have a resource, it's limited, and you want to use this specific resource for the most benefit, for the most satisfaction, the one activity or more that gives you the optimal utilization. So for example, if you have 100 real, how are you going to use it? You want to use that 100 real, making sure that, if you're planning to buy something, it's the thing that it's worth the most, right? Because you only have 100 real. So basically, when it comes to economics, it's actually related to problem solving. It's actually related to the decision making. You want to decide on something that gives you the highest satisfaction, the most benefit, making sure that, if you're going to spend resource, I know that it is up to the best utilization. And the logic is very easy. The benefit must outweigh the cost. It doesn't make any sense if, I'm going to buy something that's valued at 80 real using 100 real. You're paying 80 real with 100 real. That makes no sense. Okay? So in order to be quote unquote rational, what you want to do, you want to make sure that every action that you do, any decision that you make, the benefit outweigh the cost. That's the first rule. Now, what happens if you have more than one choices? Okay, so if you have one choice, the option is either you do it or you don't. If you have more than one, you can choose, right? You can choose not to do both. You can choose one, you can choose the second option, or you can choose both. There's a lot of options depending on whether your resource is enough to do all of the choices. That's basically it. Okay, so keep in your mind that when it comes to decision making, you want the most benefit. Okay, you want to make sure that it gives you the best utilization, the most benefit, the most satisfaction. That's it. And we call it net benefit because when you do something, there's a cost of doing that. You probably the alternative, you have another alternative, you're not going to use it for that alternative, so that's always that cost. In economics, we call it the opportunity cost. And there's always the benefit. And the difference between the cost and the benefit, that would be the net benefit. Okay, that would be economics in the general idea. Now let's move on to the problem of energy and environment. The problem itself is very straightforward. Hey, fossil fuel industry, you guys are the bad guys since you've been harming the environment. You're polluting the air. Now we have much dirtier air that costs us in terms of our living, because you don't really want to inhale the dirty air, right? You want actually to inhale clean air. It makes perfect sense. But of course, there's a reason why fossil fuel industry exists in the first place. Okay, so there's always a pros and the cons, or the benefit and the cost, the advantage and the disadvantage of anything. So, if we want to use the approach of economics, we want to use always the benefit and the cost, or in a much simpler term, the pros and the cons. When it comes to the pros of the fossil fuel industry, it's very easy. Fossil fuel generate energy. It can come in the form of electricity. It can come from, if you're thinking about fossil fuel, you're thinking of crude oil, you need it for gasoline. So gasoline produces energy that makes you able to travel with a car, with a vehicle from one place to another, which is very convenient. And in fact, if you're thinking about electricity, living without electricity today, I don't know about you, but the moment that your smartphone battery says low battery, or it shows 2% or even 10%, it shows a red battery sign, automatically you would be looking for any kind of energy source just to make sure that you can charge your phone. And the most obvious pros or advantage is, the fossil fuel industry hires people. There's jobs associated with it. All right. Now, if we look at the cost itself, well, the cost is obviously the pollution. Even if you're thinking about, for example, crude oil extraction, usually there is natural gas that comes along with it. You don't know what to do with it. You just flare it. You just burn it. That's pollution. And sometimes, when you open up a reservoir, there's a carbon dioxide within it. You're releasing carbon. Environmental hazard. There's a lot of things that basically will point out into pollution, environmental hazard. Okay, that's the benefit. I'm sorry. The environmental hazard would be the costs, because you don't like it. It's cons, and we have the pros of we need energy, we need electricity, and these people also have jobs. They actually drive the economy. Now, if we go back to our economic decision making, the problem becomes, okay, whether we should have fossil fuel industry or whether we should not. There's a pros and a cons. So we probably want to think, okay, is it better to have, substantial energy supply and jobs for the people, or is it better to have much clearer air, better environment? It's basically a choice. The choice is, between energy and environment. You just have to choose. Now, this is problematic, right? Why is it problematic? Because, why are you expecting me to choose between energy and the environment? That's like, asking me to choose, would you prefer to have your father or would you rather have your mother? You can't really answer that, right? So obviously you as an individual, you probably have your own preference, but we're thinking about, the whole world population here. You can't really have, okay, since a lot of, more people rather have energy but bad environment, or bad air, or dirty air, so we'll just do that. You can't really do that. So we want to look at the problem itself a bit deeper. Okay, so we're going to dig deeper, looking at the negative of the fossil fuel industry. Okay, so it's pretty obvious that the negative is the pollution. Can we actually use economics to solve this? Well, if somehow we can get rid of the pollution, then there's no problem, right? If there's no environmental hazard, no air pollution, no all of those kinds of pollution whatsoever, we don't really have a problem. Because now what we all have is just the pros. We don't have the cons. The problem is, now who is to be blamed? Now who should be taking care of the pollution? Okay, so when it comes to this issue, we need to understand more about a concept called externalities. Because I'm pretty sure if I ask you who is to blame for pollution, some of you would say, oh, it's the firm that emits pollution. What's the reason behind these firms emitting that pollutants, emitting carbon in the first place? The reason is because they want to produce energy. Maybe they want to extract crude oil. That crude oil that get extracted becomes money. And if you are in KFUPM, you have free tuition, then maybe that tuition money is actually coming from that. So you are part of the blame. But who is really to be blamed? Because you can always blame the supply side, the producer, the one that emits the pollution, and you can always blame the consumer, the one who gets the benefit, the one who is consuming. Let's say if it's consuming if it's about generating electricity. If you're consuming electricity, then you're part of the blame. So before we talk about, okay, who's to blame, who should take care of pollution, we need to understand the concept of externalities. What is this externalities? So when it comes to pollution, it's called a negative externalities. Okay, this is probably a new concept, but basically it means, you have, for example, you have a natural gas power plant. They are generating electricity. And they are polluting the environment because, when they generate electricity using natural gas, they need to burn it. It's a combustion engine that turns the turbine. And when they burn it, obviously, there will be CO2 emitted to the air. So, it will cause a pollution. Now, the problem here, when it comes to externality, from the firm's perspective, from the natural gas power plant, okay, we are going to generate electricity. This is the cost of generating electricity. We need natural gas as our input. We need the people as the manpower to do the operation. And the output would be electricity. And we are going to sell it. Now, from the consumer side, okay, we'll buy it as long as we can afford it. And that would be, depending on the actual price and the actual quantity, you'll get the equilibrium, or you get the market price and how much quantity that actually gets sold. Okay, that's a supply and demand. So you basically solve for the equilibrium. The problem here is that the pollution is kind of like a byproduct. It's part of the process. Now, who is going to take care of that? Who is going to clean up that pollution? Now, because it's not really defined who is to blame, and that pollution that needs to be taken care of, if the government, if there's no policy, if there's no law or any kind of regulation that enforce the natural gas power plant to clean that up, would they do it? No, right? No way. Why? Because, if I have to clean it up, if I'm the firm, the natural gas power plant, if I have to clean up my pollution, that will bring extra costs to me. When there's an extra cost, then definitely the price that I'm going to charge the consumer would be higher. Okay, because somebody, whether it's from the firm side, whether it's from the consumer side, somebody would have to pay for that pollution. And nobody wants to claim it. And in fact, nobody is, explicitly blamed. This is what we call concept of externalities. We know that there's a product of this transaction of, generating natural gas, generating electricity from natural gas. but nobody claimed that cause of pollution. Okay, and the root of this problem is because air is a public good. What do I mean by public good? It's a good that's non-excludable and non-rival. Basically, it's free. Basically, in simple terms, public good means it's a free good. Anybody can enjoy it. And if I use it, you can also use it. It's free for everyone. Now, when it's free for everyone, then you don't really know which one is to blame. But you know for sure that negative externalities, it will cause overconsumption. Why? Because there's an additional cost, right? The cost of pollution, the damage of the pollution that needs to be taken care of, but nobody is doing anything to solve this issue. So there's always going to be overconsumption. The price of the product would be always less than what it should be. Okay? Now at this point, it's very easy to say, oh, that means I just, as a government, I just need to make sure that pollution can be taken care of. Who's going to pay? Well, I'm the government. I can be the one who pays for it. Or I can enforce either the firm from the supply side, the natural gas power plant, or you can actually enforce the consumer to pay for it. But one thing for sure, if you're trying to solve this, the price of that product would always increase. So we know that if we try to, solve it through this route, we try to fix, somebody would have to clean up the pollution. We know for sure that somebody would have to pay. And that comes at a cost, an additional cost. Okay, so I have some question from student. They want to explain the term externalities. So the basic idea here is that natural gas power plant generate electricity. Whether they want it or not, they would pollute the air. They would cause environmental pollution, environmental hazard, air pollution. And if nobody, or if the government, there's no law and there's no policy that enforce these firms, this natural gas power plant, to clean it up, they will never clean it up. Why? Because it brings additional costs. It brings additional operation costs. Oh, now not only that we need to generate electricity, we need to generate electricity plus cleaning up our pollution. When it comes to any kind of firm, they're in the business to make money. You make the reason why you're in the business is to make profit. Okay. When it comes to profit, it's between your revenue and your costs. You would never want to raise your costs because that would eat up your profit. Okay, so negative externality is that additional cost. Okay, negative externality is that additional cost to a transaction. The transaction is between natural gas power plant and electricity consumer. There's additional cost of air pollution, but nobody is taking care of it. Okay. Now, one way of thinking about this is for government intervention. If the government can somehow, hey, government, I think, natural gas power plant, you guys are polluting the air, you guys are doing environmental hazard. I'm going to implement a policy that will force you to clean up your pollution. Okay. Now, if that's the scenario, that's a totally different thing, right? Because now it's no longer a negative externality. It's actually part of the transaction. But, on theory, on paper, it's very easy. Oh, it means the government has to step in, but the problem is somebody would have to pay for it. Okay. Now, from the government's perspective, there are two options. They can either force to clean up partially the pollution. Okay, let's say a natural gas power plants in Saudi Arabia emits, I don't know, 1,000 tons of carbon per day. Oh, that means, you can clean up partially. Maybe, instead of, cleaning up all of the 1,000 tons, maybe just 500 tons, just shrink it, reduce it partially. Maybe 50%, 20%, 30%, any kind of, numbers that you want. This option is relatively cheaper, right? Because you don't have to clean up all of the pollution. However, since you're not cleaning up a lot of pollution, your benefit, the benefit of having clean air, that would be less as well. The other choice is to clean up all of the pollution, reduce carbon emission to zero. No firm is allowed to reduce, to emit carbon into the air. It's very expensive because, everybody would, every firm would need to clean up their pollution. And this might affect the fossil fuel industry's survivability. Why? Because, getting back to the example of natural gas power plants and generating electricity. If I have to clean up all of my pollutants, that means, I have to somehow have a combustion engine, but I can't emit carbon dioxide to the air. For those of you who are in engineering, you know that this is actually very, very difficult because any kind of combustion would always produce carbon dioxide. So, you're forcing the natural gas power plant to clean up their pollution, increasing significantly their costs. So later on, when they want to sell their electricity to the consumer, automatically the price would be very high. Because you can't sell a product as a firm, you can't sell a product where the price doesn't cover your production costs. That's like saying, oh, in order to produce, for example, a pencil, I'm going to spend 10 rial. Now I'm going to sell this pencil at 5 rial. That makes no sense. You're not getting money, you're losing money. The only way for you to be able to sell your pencil, that would be if you sell it at a price higher than 10 rial. Okay, but of course, at this scenario, there will be very high benefit because, in terms of clean air, it's, it will be very, very clear because you won't have any kind of pollution whatsoever. Okay, so now instead of choosing between environment or energy, the problem is change. The problem is now, okay, now the problem is I know that I need to clean up in order to have better environment. The options are either clean up all the pollution or clean up partially. Okay, so getting back to the decision making, as long as the benefit outweighs the costs, that's good. And if you have more, have two options. You want to make sure that you choose the one that gives you the highest net benefit, the highest satisfaction, the highest benefit. Which one of it? Okay, there's a benefit and a cost, and you need to measure the cost as well. It's not very clear here. Okay, and in fact, if we look at first the partial reduction, okay, the clean up partially the pollutants. The two common approach are carbon tax and the carbon permit or carbon trading. Okay, when it comes to carbon tax, basically you put a price on carbon emission. Hey, firm, if you want to emit carbon into the air, you need to pay. That's basically it. Okay. In a way that, okay, that, that extra additional cost, it would make the natural gas power plant to rethink their production costs, because now they have to include a price tag for carbon emission that would increase their total cost of production. So, when they start thinking about, oh, now in order to sell my product, my electricity, the price would be higher because of the tax. Now, with the price being lower, no, I'm sorry, with the price being higher, I'm not going to find as much consumers, as much customer. So in a way, you will have a reduction in terms of using natural gas power plant in generating electricity. There is a limitation though. The big limitation is the problematic nature of finding that optimal tax rate. How much should you put a price tag on carbon emission? If you Google carbon tax or optimal carbon tax, they'll give you different numbers from different websites. In fact, even within one article, I can see different numbers. $77 per ton of carbon emitted, or 82, 30, 25, any kind of numbers that you can think of. It's problematic. Why? The problem here is that when you put a price to the carbon emission, you want to make sure that that emission, that tax, could cover the cleaning up. Okay, you want to make sure that that price tag is enough to cover the external costs. What is the external cost? The cost of polluting the environment. Now, if I ask you, how much do you value the environment? How much do you value the clean air? How much do you value a dirty air? I don't think you will come up. You can say qualitatively, okay, I value it very highly, or I value it lowly, but you can never come up with a number. In fact, since the last 30 years, a lot of research has been going on to actually find that true value of, the clean air or, better environment, but nobody actually comes up with some sort of a benchmark. Okay, so in a way that's problematic. Now, another approach is the carbon permit. Okay, you probably have heard about this, or carbon trading. So in order to emit carbon, in order to do carbon emission, you need a permit. Okay, as long as you have a permit, you can pollute the environment. If you don't have a permit, you have to clean up your pollution. Okay, now here the problem is, how many permits that you can give out. What's the price of the permit? Okay. In this scenario, it's still problematic because you don't know the true value of a clean environment, a clean air, the true value of a dirty air. Because if you don't know the true value, how can you know, okay, it's okay for us if we pollute the environment, for example, 100 tons of carbon per day. How do you know? Okay, it's not really that straightforward. Okay, so then it's becoming problematic. All right. So even both approach, the most common approach, carbon tax and carbon permit, they're both problematic. Okay. We haven't even talked about the implementation costs, because obviously we need to have some sort of law enforcement. Oh, if you not pay your tax, or if you don't have a permit but you pollute the air, then you would have to pay for a penalty, or your business would shut down. There has to be an enforcement. And you know in terms of implementation itself, you need to be able to control it, and finding that particular accurate value, that would be just very difficult. Okay, but a lot of countries have, okay, we think the best scenario for us is for partial reduction. Okay, we'll come up later on how countries actually decide on this, but for now, some countries, just for information, some countries decide, okay, we'll take the partial reduction, because the Paris Agreement, because of Paris Agreement, a lot of countries decides, okay, we have to lower carbon emission by such and such. Okay, now this is an example. So UK energy giants, so that would be RWE and Uniper, they prefer carbon trading over carbon tax. So if we have to choose between one of them, obviously a lot of people have different preference. Okay, so it's totally up to the regulator, or up to the authority to choose one. Okay, this news article is actually a few days ago. The second choice is a full reduction. Okay, but a full reduction can mean two things: killing the fossil fuel industry entirely. Okay, fossil fuel industry no more. Okay, that's one way of having a full reduction. Or the fossil fuel industry has to somehow find out a new approach, a new method, where they won't be polluting the environment. Okay, now of course, having no fossil fuel at all, it doesn't sound very plausible, right? It's not possible. Okay, because we do need energy. And fossil fuel, and the second case where fossil fuel industry has to change their method, change their approach, maybe they can do it, maybe they can, but it takes time. And for the time being, that's what have been going on to a lot of oil companies, right? Oil companies now right away, oh, now we are no longer an oil company, we're an energy company, because now we care about clean energy, we care about being green. Now our name is this, our logo looks like oil, now we change it into more of environmental friendly thing. So that's one way of doing it. But when it comes to this approach, it has to come from the firm, and the firm has to do some sort of research, and of course it will be costly as well. At the end of the day, no matter what your option is, there will be a cost, and there will always be benefit, but the benefit you don't really know, because you can't accurately measure the benefit. The benefit of cleaning up the pollution, how do you value it? For example, right now in your room, or in your wherever you are, the pollutants is, say, 10 units of the total air. Now if it's being reduced to 5 units, now how much more are you willing to have that? There's no actual formula, or no actual equations to actually find this. And this is where the problem lies. And in fact, when it comes to this, a lot of institutions have come up with a different approach. So here, this is based on UN, WHO. They found out that air pollution kills 7 million people annually. And according to World Bank, air pollution, the very last sentence, air pollution costs society more than $5 trillion every year. Some people or some institution comes up with an approach, okay? Basically, it's based on values of statistical life. So, obviously, everyone has a value, which probably doesn't sound very humane thing, but everybody has a value. And if they get sick, that value would decrease, and that would damage the value of that particular individual. And you combine those, and then you get the cost of air pollution. That's one way of doing it. But this is not what the benchmark is for everyone. Why? Because an individual in Saudi Arabia compared to an individual in the United States, compared to an individual in Indonesia, since I'm from Indonesia, might be different. You can't really have a benchmark for this. So, it's all up to estimates. And in fact, you're not really solving the problem, but, at least you have numbers to throw for. Okay. Now, at the end of the day, it will still be problematic. Okay. We want to have some sort of benefit that's accurate, and a numeric value of benefit, and a cost, a numeric value as well. And then we can compare them, and the decision becomes straightforward. Now, here we can never be accurate because, how we value clean air, how we value dirty air is all over the place. Some people might say, oh no, I don't really care about air pollution because I care more about energy. I want to make sure I can buy electricity at the lowest possible price. I don't want the firm to care about the air pollution because later on the price of electricity would go higher. I don't want that. Okay, so at the end of the day, since this is a total mess, okay, at the end of the day, it's just up to choose one. And when it comes to reality, when it comes to choosing a decision, you have to choose one. At the end of the day, it's up to the government, it's up to the authority, whatever they want. Okay. So, a lot of people start to think differently. This is where renewable energy comes in. So renewable energy is actually out of the box solution. Why do I say it's an out of the box solution? The problem roots down into the energy can cause pollution. You need the energy, you need the environment. Unfortunately, energy causes pollution. Why not have both energy and environment? We don't have to choose one, but instead of having energy generating process that would pollute the environment, why not have an energy source that will not pollute the environment? So all the pros without the cons. It changes the structure of the problem entirely. So if you have renewable energy and it can cover the necessity of the demand for energy, then problem solved. Okay, but this involves replacing fossil fuel energy with renewable energy, and you don't need to choose between energy and environment, which is very good. That is on theory, but what about the reality? Now, if you look at this one is about renewable energy or electricity generation by source. Okay, just looking at renewable. So this is for the world. I got this graph from IEA. If you look at it, okay, it looks like hydro is, the most, followed by wind, solar, and geothermal. In terms of gigawatt hour, it's about 4 million. Well, probably 4.4. If you add up all of the others, probably about 6 million gigawatt hour. So there is, and there's also a trend of increasing use of renewable energy. But of course, there are issues and limitations. Okay, there are issues and concerns. First of all, the capability of replacing the energy from fossil fuel. Can renewable energy replace fossil fuel? That would be the first issue. The second one is the reliability issue, because when it comes to renewable energy, if you're thinking about photovoltaic cells, wind energy, it's intermittent. Sometimes it exists, some other time it doesn't. And lastly, of course, when we get back to economics, the cost itself, the cost of generating energy from renewables. Okay, so in a way, think about the option now becomes, should we switch to renewable energy or should we not? At the end of the day, getting back to economic decision making, it's based on, what's the cost of moving or transitioning into renewable energy, and what's the benefit? Well, the benefit is pretty clear. Now we don't have to deal with this environmental issue, but there's a cost associated with it. Okay. Now, if we look at the total energy supply, this by source, for oil, coal, natural gas, biofuels, and waste, nuclear, hydro, wind, solar, that hydro, wind, solar, that's not that much. Okay. It's, mostly about oil, coal, and natural gas. And you expect hydro, wind, solar, and probably nuclear as well, and biofuels and waste to replace this. That would take some time. Okay. If you look at, maybe it's not just energy, maybe start small, start with electricity generation. Even if you look at electricity generation, look, we counted the renewable sector alone, it was about 6 million roughly. That would just be able to replace natural gas. The one covered by coal is actually about 10 million gigawatt hour. Okay. So now you have the problem of, the penetration of renewable energy. Of course, you could always argue, hey, why not everybody push for renewable energy? The problem is, at the end of the day, when it comes to economics, is what's the cost of doing this? Is it really difficult to have renewable energy to replace fossil fuel? Well, based on this data alone, it looks like you need a lot of effort to make sure that renewable energy is able to replace coal, natural gas, and oil. It would be a big effort. Okay. Not only that, from the consumer side, if the product is electricity, right? If I ask you, would you rather buy a electricity from generated from solar panel, or would you rather buy an electricity generated from coal power plants? At the end of the day, you could arguably say, okay, I love the environment, I want to go green, so I'll choose the renewables, I'll choose the solar panel. But what if the cost is higher? What if the price is higher for renewables? Okay. And maybe you could arguably say, well, I still prefer, I'm willing to pay that extra cost to get electricity generated from renewables. Okay, that would be for you. But what about for others? Because, when you're thinking about buying something, purchasing something, what you care about is definitely the price, right? You would ask what's the price is. And if the price is okay, you're willing to pay for that price, then the next thing that you would do is you would, grab your wallet and see whether you actually have the money. When you actually have the money, and then you would be purchasing that particular good. Now, if we see here, this is the levelized cost of energy comparison, levelized cost of energy, LCOE. Now, this is looking at, this is based on Lazard estimates. This is, I think it's exclusively for United States. Now, this one is the unsubsidized one. Of course, there are, when it comes to solar PV, crystalline utility scale, thin film utility scale, they're much cheaper. Wind, they're much cheaper. And compared to the conventional ones, which is gas, combined cycle, coal, nuclear, and gas peaking. But when it comes to rooftop residential, this is still very expensive. Now, to sum it all up, what I would say is that at the end of the day, since we never really know the benefit, we never really know the costs, at the end of the day, I would conclude that it's totally up to us. It has to be a collective effort. If we want to switch to renewable energy, it would have to be a collective effort, because based on this, you can't really get a sufficient amount of electricity generated. This is just for electricity, generated based on renewables. It will take some time. And once you add more and more demand for renewable energy, then the price would definitely go higher, because when you use photovoltaic cells, PV cells, you obviously need materials. And if you want to replace the coal, you will be needing a lot of materials for that solar PV. So you're creating new problems in the market for that materials for the solar PV. And you still haven't solved the issue of reliability. That is when battery comes in hand. But until now, there's no real breakthrough in terms of battery that can keep a huge amount of electricity. So at the end of the day, it's up to preference. It's up to the collective effort. If everybody decides that, okay, we are all in renewable energy, and then we can have a transition. But at the end of the day, if you look at different countries, they have different constraints, they have different budget. Can they actually make the transition since it's costly? It's probably not fair for countries that's still developing, let alone transition from coal power plants or natural gas power plants to renewables. We can't even have all of our citizens to have electricity. Why should we care about renewables? So there's a lot of different perspectives, okay? And when we discuss, what we discuss here is just from an economics point of view. There's always the social aspect of it. There's always a political aspect of it. And we haven't even touched these two. Okay, so based on economics and economics alone, we know the limitations. If we want to have a smooth transition into renewable energy, this issue has to be addressed. Okay, or maybe we don't really need to move or phase out the fossil fuel industry to renewable energy, maybe we can have reduction from the fossil fuel industry. You can have that option as well. Or you can have this partial reduction. You always have an option. So basically you have three options: partial reduction, full reduction, renewable energy. But the problem is, for all of these actions, you would need, you would have to pay for it. There's a cost associated with it. And at the end of the day, getting back to the decision maker, you need to choose one. And at the end of the day, it's up to the authority, it's up to the decision maker, whatever they want. Okay, so I will conclude it at that. So I've been going on for about 15 minutes, probably even more. So I'll stop here. And if you have questions, feel free to ask, and I will be gladly answer them.
Thank you, Dr. Akiyama. The presentation was really insightful. To ask any question, please raise your hand and I will be unmute you. We have a question from
I'm sorry.
yes, Doctor. Yes. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I know. I'm seeing the group chat, and it looks like there are some questions here. So, since nobody actually raised their hand first, why not I ask the question from the group chat first, if that's fine with you?
Yes, it's fine, Doctor.
Okay. Evidence for this number, I think you were talking about, the World Bank estimates. So again, it's just estimates, evidence. You should probably ask them on how they can actually come with that number. Isn't this graph shows a low density problem in renewable energy? Yes, right. So, when it comes to renewable energy, we're not really sure whether, renewable energy can replace, can be the main, or not, and not mentioning replacing the whole fossil fuel industry, but even renewable energy as the main source of energy, even that, with the current technology, it would be very costly to have that. Isn't nuclear energy more safe since their wastes are small compared to coal? In terms of safe, in terms of an environment, this is where, the detail of the problem, right? Because, we know that electricity generation causes pollution, causes environmental hazard. And, there are different ways of generating electricity, and each of them, causes different level of environmental hazard. And this is where the importance of, the accuracy of measuring the, the broken environment is really important. Because, in order to charge these people with the right amount of tax or a permit, you need to know what this, the problem is. Okay, what is the cause of that broken environment in the first place? And we have different kinds of power plants. We have, different kinds of technology. They're all different. And so, it adds to the big problem of the inaccuracy of actually measuring or determining the value of, environmental hazard that happens because of power plants. Okay. The next one, is it possible if there's a country which only depends on renewable energy? There's one actually. No, actually, maybe now it's two. I know Iceland and Norway. They depend entirely on renewables. Iceland, I think more on geothermal, and I know Norway depends a lot on hydro. Yes, you can have this. How can this country benefit from this process from the economy side? Now, if you can have, the whole economy or the whole country to be run by energy using renewables, of course, again, back to the economic decision making based on the economics, you always have an option. You always have an option whether you want to use renewables or you don't. Now, maybe for this Norway, I mean, if you look at Norway, a country in Scandinavian, they have a lot of rivers. They have, a lot of hydropower that can be generated to satisfy the whole demand. So that's no problem for them. Okay. In fact, if the price is high, I think when it comes to Norway, they probably can't afford it. The problem comes from, if you can't afford the entire economy to be run by renewable energy, that is when you have a problem. Because, if you have two options, you can use A where it's cheap, or you can use B where it's expensive. You would always choose the cheapest one. You would never choose the most expensive one. If you choose the expensive one, you would be using more of your resource. You will be using more of your money. And when this happens, pretty soon you run out of resources. You're not using your resource up to the most optimal action. That's the problem. So from the economy side, you just have to make sure that, every decision that you make is, for the most benefit of the economy. So for some countries, yes, they can. For some others, they won't. Okay, they just can't. This is the problem of, Paris Agreement. Oh, everybody should lower their, for example, their carbon emission to say 20% by 2020. Okay, for the world, it has to be 20%. Now, people would ask, well, is it going to be everybody has to be reducing their pollution into, their carbon emission into 20%? That's one way of doing it. Or you can have some countries do 0% or even 5%, while some other countries still have 30%. But, if you're thinking about interaction between a country and another, it's probably going to be very hard, right? So it's basically like saying, hey, like me, for example, I'm Norway, and Norway would say, hey, I've done my part. Now my carbon emission is 0%. What about you? Have you done anything? Have you reduced your carbon emission? That would be hard, right? Because there's no strict enforcement of the law itself. So, this problem, it looks very straightforward from the perspective of energy and environment. Oh, we just need to have renewable energy. But to be honest, there are different layers of problems that needs to be solved. Okay, moving on to the next one. From a wider viewpoint, how economic academics determine the right economic policy in such issue? I mean, how to determine the right amount, magnitude, time, and direction? From academics' point of view, we don't know. To be honest, what we usually do is we would just use the literature. So a lot of research have been going on in terms of determining the value of cleaner air. So we would just use that and do a sensitivity analysis. Just if you're doing this much or if you're doing less, this is what's going to happen. We build up a model and we see what's going to happen to the economy. Because, for example, if you're looking at natural gas power plants, they have pollution. Now, with natural gas power plant, with a carbon tax, for example, if you do this much carbon tax, this much would, it would increase the price by this much. This would affect the electricity market by this much. And afterwards, from economics point of view, economics academics point of view, we just give our analysis, we give it to the decision maker, we give it to the authority, whatever they will decide to do, let them do it. Okay, that's always the standpoint of the economics academic. We always just, we give out, we provide the clear outcome, what's going to happen, our prediction. This is how is it going to affect the market? How is it going to change the behavior of consumers, the behavior of producers? And later on, we let the decision maker or the policy maker or the government or the authority to decide on what they think the best. Okay. So I think those are the questions that I can read. There are a lot of Arabic questions in Arabic. Unfortunately, I can't read Arabic, so I'll leave that to you, Faisal.
Yes, we have problem with the attendance link, but regarding to who raised hand, I will choose Mustafa Al-Jum'a. Please ask your question, Mustafa.
Assalamu alaikum, dear Dr. Muhammad. Thank you for your great presentation. I have a question regarding that shows that partial clean up that for tax or trading. How do we reduce carbon emission? What is the new technology or the latest trends that industries or any country use?
Okay, so when it comes to reducing carbon emission partially, now I'm sorry, can you mute that? Hearing echoes. I'll click mute. Oh, okay, all right, thanks. Now, when it comes to carbon tax or carbon trading, when it comes to a tax, okay, you're forcing a higher price. So automatically with a higher price, there will be a reduction on electricity generated. My example was about natural gas power plant. So obviously there will be a reduction in natural gas power plants. If you force consumption will be lower. That's how you reduce carbon emission. Because when the natural gas power plant doesn't have to generate as much electricity as before, because the demand gets lower, then automatically the consumption would go down. Similarly to the carbon trading or carbon permits, it's kind of a permit system. So, as long as, the amount of permit, the amount of pollution that is allowed is less than what's going on currently, then you will always have a reduction in pollution. You'll always have carbon emission reduced. So, these two ways are the government intervention approach, where, the government steps in and they try to correct these externalities, correct this pollution problem. There's a different way, what you just mentioned. Maybe the, say, for example, natural gas power plant comes up with a new technology that, lowers their pollution, lowers the carbon dioxide emitted to the air. That's one way of doing that. And, obviously, would that reduce the carbon emission? Yes, but I would say maybe. Why? Because, if you think about it, so from the supply side, they can produce, when it comes to the supply side, how do I say this? They have a new technology. They're not going to pollute as much. So they can produce more, they can generate more electricity compared to the initial case that causes the same amount of pollution, right? Now, with that scenario, that means, I can still sell more of the electricity that I produce at the same level of pollution. So if you're thinking that pollution is an issue, okay, we have new technology. We can actually increase our electricity generation. So if that's the scenario, you're still going to have the same amount of pollution. You're still going to have the same amount of carbon emission. But, even though the firm actually reduced they come up with a new technology that reduces the emission. So, that's why when it comes to, making sure that carbon emission always reduce, it has to be the government that intervenes. Because at the end of the day, if there's no strict enforcement on cleaning up this pollution, then no firm would actually want to clean up their pollution, because that's additional cost. They will just choose based on their maximum profit. They want to maximize their profit. They're in it for the money. So, to sum up, at the end of the day, it has to be the government that steps in. Okay? I would conclude at that.
Thank you so much. I have one more thing to say to you, Doctor, and I want you to hear your opinion about it. Why we always think about the reduction of the carbon dioxide? Why not think another option, like use the carbon dioxide and convert it to another useful chemicals? I know it will make high cost with making a new technology, but on the other hand, you will make up for the new products you produce.
Right. So what you're referring to is actually what's called the circular economy, the circular carbon economy. So, yes, when it comes to economic problem solving, one way of solving it, one way to come up with a solution is either to find the true, accurate, precise cost and benefit analysis, or if that is not possible, you change the problem, the structure of the problem itself. So we started off with choosing between energy and environment, and then we choose between reducing the pollution or eliminate pollution entirely. And I mentioned that renewable energy is actually out of the box, and what you mentioned about circular carbon economy is also an out-of-box solution, because now you have an entirely different problem. It brings up into a new option, a new additional option, where you can actually use the carbon dioxide that gets emitted and use it for other things that would eat up the pollution, and then later on, you no longer have the pollution problem. Yes, this is a very good out of the box solution, but at the end of the day, still, how costly would it be to have this circular carbon economy? At the end of the day, a lot of people, you mentioned a lot of people, a lot of countries, a lot of news articles says it's always about reducing carbon emission. Why? Because that's the cheapest option. You don't get as much benefit. Well, the benefit itself, you don't really know the actual benefit. Nobody can actually come up with the true value of it. But you know that it's the least cheapest option. Okay, so if you think about it, if you don't know what the benefit is, the most logical choice would be to go through the one option that is the least cost. For example, if you have four different smartphones, you don't really know the features. It's like a black box. They're all black box. You have to choose one, you know, based on your budget. You would always choose the one that's the cheapest, right? That's the reason behind why everybody keeps talking about carbon, you know, lowering carbon emission, reducing carbon emission. But, you know, that option, you know, of circular carbon economy do exist. It's just not that attractive, I would say, at least for now.
Thank you, Doctor. We don't have any more question, and we reach the end of the webinar. Thank you for patient to answer the question, and thank you for attendees. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.